A cold, faithless businessman sees his life change when the miracle that restores his son's sight forces him to face what he always denied: the power of love. Between reason and faith, he will discover that the true miracle not only heals eyes, it transforms hearts. If you like stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. The British-made clock marked exactly 6:45 in the morning when Richard Morrison opened his eyes in the master bedroom of his penthouse. He hadn't needed an alarm clock for years. His body had conditioned itself to wake at the same time every day, an iron discipline he applied to all aspects of his life. He rose from the king-sized bed, walked to the panoramic window, and contemplated New York City awakening 30 floors below his feet. The city stretched infinitely before his eyes, a concrete and glass jungle he had learned to master, with the same calculated coldness he applied to business. Every building, every traffic movement, every light that turned on represented opportunities, markets, possibilities for expansion for his technology empire. At 42, Richard commanded Morrison Tech, a company valued at $3 billion, with offices spread across 12 countries and more than 15,000 employees around the world. He headed to the Carrara marble bathroom, where his morning routine followed the same religious pattern of the last 8 years. A bath of exactly 12 minutes, shaving with military precision, choosing a suit from the 15 identical options hanging in his closet. Everything planned, everything controlled, everything perfectly predictable. In the gourmet kitchen of his penthouse, the table was set with impeccable precision. An espresso, whole wheat toast, geometrically cut fruit, and the 3 newspapers he read religiously every morning: the New York Times, Financial Times, and Wall Street Journal. Not for pleasure, but for strategic necessity. Information was power, and power was the only thing he still believed in. As he drank his coffee, his eyes scanned the headlines without truly absorbing them. His mind was already at the office, planning the 9 o'clock meeting with the development team, the 11 o'clock video conference with the Japanese investors, the strategic lunch with a potential client from the banking sector. Every minute of his day was planned 3 weeks in advance. The intercom on his desk emitted its usual discreet sound. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," came the efficient voice of Sandra, his secretary of 15 years. "The driver is waiting in the garage. I confirm your schedule. Meeting with development at 9, video conference with Tokyo at 11, lunch with the director of the National Bank at 1 o'clock. "Perfect, Sandra. And Gabriel?" The question came out automatically, part of a routine that had become mechanical over the past 8 years, but which carried an emotional weight he preferred not to analyze. Carla called at 7:15 as instructed. Gabriel slept well, had breakfast normally, and is preparing for his 10 o'clock physical therapy session. This afternoon he has an appointment with Dr. Morales. Richard nodded without showing emotion, but something in his chest tightened slightly, as it always did when the subject was his son, Gabriel. His only son, the fruit of 9 months of a pregnancy that had cost the life of Helen, his wife, and had brought into the world a child born blind. 8 years later, he could still feel the weight of that double loss like a stone in his stomach, a constant reminder that not all the money in the world could buy back what truly mattered. Helen Campbell. Morrison had been everything Richard was not: spontaneous, emotional, a dreamer, an architect by training, an artist at heart. She had colored his methodical life with a palette of emotions he didn't even know existed. They met at an art exhibition in New York City, he accompanying an important client, she exhibiting her delicate watercolors depicting children playing in city parks. "So you look lost," she had said, approaching with a smile that lit up the entire room. "I don't usually frequent art exhibitions," he replied with brutal honesty. "Then why did you come?" "Business." She laughed, a crystalline laugh that made him smile for the first time in months. "At least you're honest. Most people invent some excuse about appreciating contemporary art." From that casual encounter, a romance was born that lasted 3 years before marriage, 2 years of happy matrimony. And then, the void. Helen had died in childbirth Due to complications the doctors called unpredictable, leaving Richard alone with a baby born unable to see the world. For Richard, Gabriel's blindness was not just a medical deficiency, it was a punishment for having been too happy, for having believed that life could be good, for having let down his guard and allowed love to enter his emotional fortress. God, if he existed, had exacted too high a price for his moments of happiness. Since then he had built his empire as a new fortress, not just to protect his businesses, but to protect himself from the emotions that threatened his sanity. Control efficiency, coldly calculated goals. These were the only things he could trust. Love had proven to be a dangerous illusion, capable of destroying everything in a matter of minutes. The private elevator took him directly to the basement of the penthouse where his driver Jack waited beside the armored Mercedes. Jack had worked for the family for 10 years and had learned to respect his boss's morning silence. During the 40 minutes of traffic to the Wall Street office, Richard checked emails, approved contracts, and made decisions that moved millions of dollars. His office occupied the entire 30th floor of the Morrison Tech corporate building. Glass walls offered a 360-degree view of the city, while Italian designer furniture and cutting-edge technology created an environment that impressed clients and intimidated competitors. On the main wall, only one photo, him and Helen on their wedding day, she radiant with happiness, he smiling in a way he could no longer reproduce. Mr. Morrison, Sandra entered carrying a folder with the day's reports. The development team is in the meeting room. The prototype of the new software is performing above expectations. Excellent. And the Japanese confirmed the video conference. They confirmed. The CEO, CFO, and 2 vice presidents will be present. They showed great interest in our proposal for expansion into the Asian market. Richard nodded, quickly flipping through the documents. Numbers, graphs, projections. The world made sense when reduced to objective data. There was no room for emotions, for losses, for pain, only results and strategies. The 9 o'clock meeting proceeded as planned. His team presented the latest developments of the enterprise management software that would revolutionize the American market. Richard listened, asked precise questions, made quick decisions. He was known in the market as the machine, not for cruelty, but for the robotic efficiency with which he conducted business. Excellent work, he said at the end of the meeting. I want the beta tests concluded by Friday. Sandra will schedule the presentation for investors next week. As the team left the room, Richard remained looking out the window. Down below, the city buzzed with life, people rushing to appointments, children going to school, families living their simple routines. A pang of something he refused to call longing crossed his chest. The video conference with the Japanese was a success. After 2 hours of negotiation, they closed a preliminary agreement to bring Morrison Tech to the Asian market, a deal worth $400 million over the next 5 years. But when he hung up the call, Richard felt only the usual emptiness. Another milestone reached, another victory that did not fill the hole in his chest. It was during the break before lunch that Sandra interrupted him with the call that would change everything. Mr. Richard, Carla is on the line. She said it's about Gabriel. Richard's stomach immediately tightened. Carla never called during business hours unless it was an emergency. In 8 years of caring for Gabriel, she had become much more than the nanny. She was a nurse, physical therapist, teacher, and the closest person to a maternal figure Gabriel knew. Carla, what happened? His voice came out more strained than he intended. Richard. Carla's voice on the other end of the line was strange, an incomprehensible mix of crying and laughter that left him completely disoriented. Is Gabriel okay? Did he get hurt? Richard, you need to sit down. What I'm about to tell you will seem completely impossible. The businessman felt his legs weaken. In his life experience, impossible news was usually the worst news. Just tell me, Carla, what happened to Gabriel? Gabriel can see, Richard. He can see. Silence stretched for long seconds that seemed eternal. Richard tried to process the words, but they simply made no sense to his logical and methodical mind. It was as if someone had said gravity had stopped working. What do you mean, seeing? Carla, did you? Did you hit your head? Had some kind of accident? Gabriel was born blind, completely blind. We have 8 years of medical documentation, exams, reports from specialists worldwide. I know how this sounds, Richard. I know it seems crazy. But you need to come here now, immediately. Gabriel is seeing everything. He described my clothes in detail, told me the color of my eyes, talked about the flowers in the park, about people passing by. Things he never, ever could have known. Richard disconnected the video conference unceremoniously, leaving a room full of Asian investors staring at an empty screen. He rushed out of the office, went straight down to the garage and yelled to Jack, "Central Park now, it's an emergency." During the 25 minutes of intense traffic to the park, his mind worked frantically trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe Gabriel had always had some residual vision that doctors hadn't detected. Maybe there was a new medical technique Carla had discovered. Maybe it was a misdiagnosis from birth. Anything was more plausible than what, a miracle? Richard Morrison hadn't believed in miracles for 8 years. Meanwhile, 15 miles away in Central Park, John Morrison walked carefully along the familiar path, his small right hand firmly holding Carla's arm. At 8 years old, Gabriel had developed an extraordinary ability to navigate through his other senses. He knew every sound, every texture, every smell of that park they visited 3 times a week. Carla Ribeiro was 35 and had dedicated the last 5 years of her life to caring for Gabriel. Trained in physical therapy, specializing in child development, she had been hired when Gabriel was 3 and quickly became indispensable, not just for her technical knowledge, but for the infinite patience and genuine affection she developed for the boy. "Carla, can I go to the fountain alone today?" "I know the way by heart," Gabriel asked, his voice carrying a maturity that belied his age. Blindness had forced Gabriel to develop early independence, but also a special sensitivity to understand the world through other channels. Carla hesitated for a moment. Gabriel had memorized every inch of that park with the precision of a human GPS. Every curve of the path, every bench, every tree were references etched into his spatial memory. His ability to navigate without sight was impressive, the result of years of intensive training and adaptation. Still, the responsibility on her shoulders always made her cautious. "You can go, my love, but don't leave the main path, okay? I'll stay here on the bench watching. If you need anything, just shout." Gabriel smiled, that sincere smile that melted anyone's heart. Even without seeing, there was something special in his eyes, an inner light that conveyed purity and kindness in a way Carla had never seen in another child. The boy began to walk alone, counting his steps as he always did. 15 steps to the first right turn, 22 to the second bench where an old man always sat feeding pigeons, 35 to the circular fountain where children played. Each number was a reference etched in his memory, an invisible but absolutely precise map that guided him through the world. But on that specific day, something was different. City maintenance work had slightly altered the path, placing a temporary fence that diverted the trail a few feet to the left. Warning signs alerted to the detour, but Gabriel obviously couldn't see them. Confident in his mental map built over years, Gabriel continued straight ahead, following the route he knew perfectly. That's when he realized something was wrong. The sound of the fountain should have been closer after 35 steps, but he only heard the distant rumble of West Side Highway traffic. The scent of flowers that always perfumed that area didn't reach him. He stopped, trying to orient himself by familiar sounds, but anxiety began to take over. He turned right, then left, each movement taking him further from the known path. His small heart began to race. He had never felt so lost, so vulnerable in his 8 years of life. "Carla," he shouted, but his voice was lost in the wind and city sounds. Panic began to grow in his chest. Tears began to stream down his cheeks as he walked aimlessly, extending his hands, trying to find something solid, something familiar that could guide him back home. A few blocks away, in the constant hustle of Union Square, John woke with a start under the awning of a clothing store that had closed 2 years ago. The 7-year-old boy had learned to sleep with one eye open, always alert to the dangers that street life offered a lone child. Ill-intentioned people, other homeless people looking for food or territory, police who sometimes treated them like miniature criminals. John had a story that began with love and ended in abandonment. His mother, Maria Smith, had been a hard-working woman who worked as a cleaner to support her son alone. John never knew his father. He only knew that he left before you were born, as Maria used to explain. Mother and son lived in a small boarding house room in Chinatown, and despite financial difficulties, Maria managed to keep John fed, clean, and attending a public school. Tragedy struck when John was 5. Maria began to show strange symptoms: persistent cough, high fevers, dramatic weight loss. The doctors at the community clinic, overwhelmed and with limited resources, diagnosed several different things: flu, bronchitis, stress. When they finally discovered it was advanced tuberculosis, it was already too late. Maria spent her last months trying to find a family for John, but without close relatives and without resources to pay lawyers, her options were limited. When she passed away, John was 5.5 and found himself completely alone in the world. The municipal shelter was overcrowded, foster families had endless waiting lists, and John, frightened and traumatized, ended up running away to the streets. Over the next 2 years, John developed a survival wisdom that contrasted shockingly with his age. He learned where to get food without stealing, how to find safe places to sleep, how to avoid the dangers that stalked vulnerable children. Most importantly, he maintained the faith his mother had taught him, talking daily with God as if he were his best friend and protector. "Good morning, Heavenly Father," he murmured as he stretched that morning, adjusting the worn t-shirt he had been wearing for 3 weeks. "Thank you for another safe night. Thank you for not raining. What have you prepared for me today?" John had a peculiar morning routine he had developed through trial and error. Every morning he walked to Mr. Joe's bakery on the corner of Bleecker Street, where Mrs. Martha, the baker's wife, pitying his situation, gave him the leftover bread from the day before. He ate some to satisfy his hunger, shared some with other homeless people he met along the way, and always saved a piece for the stray dogs that roamed the area. This natural generosity of John was something that impressed everyone who knew him. Even with so little, he always found a way to share with those who had even less. Mrs. Benedict, a 70-year-old woman who distributed soup in downtown, used to say that John had the heart of an angel in a child's body. On that specific day, however, something different happened. Instead of following his usual route to the bakery, John felt an inexplicable urge to walk in the opposite direction, towards Central Park. He couldn't explain why. He just felt with absolute certainty that he should be there. It was as if a silent voice in his heart was guiding him. John's gift was something he didn't question, but that had accompanied him since he was very young. Even with his mother, he had strange dreams that always came true, premonitions about people he knew, a special ability to sense when someone needed help. Maria used to say that John was born with a heart open to God, and John carried this legacy with the seriousness of a child who grew up too fast. When he reached the outskirts of Central Park, after almost an hour's walk, John heard a faint cry coming from behind a clump of trees near a construction area. He approached cautiously. Life on the streets had taught him to be careful with unfamiliar situations. That's when he saw Gabriel, lost and frightened, his hands outstretched trying to find something solid to lean on, tears streaming down his small face. The boy clearly couldn't see and was in a state of total panic. "Hey, are you okay?" John asked, approaching slowly so as not to scare the child further. Gabriel stopped crying for a moment, relieved to hear a friendly human voice. "I'm lost. I can't find my nanny. Can you help me, please?" John observed the boy more closely. He immediately noticed that Gabriel wasn't looking directly at him, that his eyes seemed to unfocus into the void, without fixing on any point. The boy's clothes were expensive, well cared for, indicating he came from a family with resources. He quickly understood the situation, a rich, blind child lost in a public park. "Of course I can help you. What's your nanny's name?" "Carla. She was sitting on the bench near the main path. I came to the fountain alone because I already know the way, but I think I got lost." This has never happened before. John knew that park very well. He had spent several nights sleeping there when the downtown area was too dangerous or when the cold became unbearable. He knew exactly where the main path, the benches, the fountain, and all the references Gabriel mentioned were. "You can't see, can you?" he asked with the typical frankness of children, without malice or embarrassment. Gabriel nodded, trying to hold back the tears that welled up again. "I was born this way. My dad says that. The boy's voice faltered, carrying a sadness too deep for someone so young. My dad says it's because when I was born, my mom, she... John didn't need to hear the rest. He immediately recognized the pain in Gabriel, a pain similar to the one he himself carried, the suffering of a child who felt responsible for tragedies far beyond his control. Something inside John's chest stirred, a strange sensation, a warmth that started in his hands and spread throughout his body. He had felt this other times, when he prayed for injured dogs he found on the street, when he comforted Mrs. Benedict on days she cried for her daughter who had passed away, when he helped other street children who were sick or hurt. "Can I do something?" John asked, extending his small hands towards Gabriel's face. "I promise I won't hurt you. I just want to help." Gabriel hesitated for a moment. He had learned to be cautious with strangers, but something in the other boy's voice completely reassured him. There was a purity, an absolute sincerity in John's words that dispelled all his fears. "You can," Gabriel whispered, closing his eyes out of habit. John placed his small, calloused hands over Gabriel's eyes and closed his own. The world around them seemed to fall silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Heavenly Father," John whispered with the intimacy of someone speaking to their best friend, "this boy here really needs your help. He is suffering, he is lost, and he cannot see the beautiful world you created. I know you can do anything because Mom always taught me that. Please, if it is your will, help him to see, help him to be happy." The warmth John felt intensified dramatically. It was as if a powerful energy passed through him, a force that definitely did not come from within his small body, but from somewhere much larger, much more powerful. Gabriel felt the warm hands over his eyes and a completely new sensation, as if something was changing, reorganizing, healing inside his head. Suddenly, points of light began to appear behind his closed eyelids, first small and faint, then larger and brighter, until Gabriel could distinguish vague shapes, undefined contours, and finally colors, true vibrant colors, as he had never imagined they could exist. I'm seeing," Gabriel whispered, his voice filled with absolute astonishment and disbelief. "I can see you. I can see everything." John opened his eyes and smiled, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "God heard our prayer," he said simply, as if miracles were routine events in his life. Gabriel looked around with wide eyes, absorbing every detail of the world that now opened before him, for the first time in 8 years of life. The trees were greener than he had ever imagined, the sky bluer, the clouds whiter and fluffier, and especially the face of the boy standing before him, a boy with brown skin, curly, messy hair, bright brown eyes full of kindness and wisdom that belied his apparent age. "Gabriel! Gabriel, where are you? My God, where is this child?" Carla's desperate voice echoed through the park, growing closer. "It's my nanny," Gabriel exclaimed, pointing in the direction of the voice with a visual precision that surprised him. "She must be very worried." John smiled again, that pure smile that would become unforgettable for Gabriel. "Let's go to her then. Now you can see the way perfectly." The two boys walked side by side, John guiding with knowledge of the terrain, Gabriel marveling at every step he could take without fumbling, without hesitation, seeing exactly where he was stepping. They found Carla running desperately among the trees, calling Gabriel's name with an increasingly distressed voice. When she saw him walking normally, without his cane, without fumbling, without hesitation in his steps, she stopped abruptly, as if she had received an electric shock. "Gabriel? How are you? How are you?" Carla couldn't finish the sentence, watching incredulously as Gabriel looked directly into her eyes for the first time in 5 years of living together. "Carla, I can see everything. I can see you." Gabriel ran towards the nanny who had raised him, who enveloped him in a tight hug as tears of confusion and joy streamed down her face. How is this possible?" "Gabriel, are you really seeing me? Can you see my face?" "I can. You have brown eyes and you're wearing a blue blouse with yellow flowers, and your hair is in a ponytail. Carla, you're even more beautiful than I imagined." When Carla raised her tear-filled eyes to thank the other boy, to ask what had happened, to understand how it was possible, John had already disappeared among the park trees, as if he had never been there. Richard's phone rang 3 times before he decided to answer. He was in the middle of a video conference with investors from Singapore and did not usually accept interruptions during important meetings. But Carla's name on the caller ID made him hesitate. She never called during business hours unless it was an emergency. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I need to take an urgent call," he said to the screen, temporarily turning off the video. "Richard?" Carla's voice on the other end of the line was strange, a mix of crying and laughing that he couldn't decipher. "What happened, Carla?" "Is Gabriel okay?" "Richard, you need to sit down. What I'm about to tell you will seem impossible." The businessman felt his stomach clench. In his experience, impossible news was usually bad news. "Just tell me, Carla." "Gabriel can see, Richard." "He can see." Silence stretched for long seconds. Richard tried to process the words, but they simply made no sense to his logical and methodical mind. "What do you mean, seeing?" "Carla, did you hit your head? Gabriel was born blind. The doctors were categorical. I know how this sounds, but you need to come here now. Gabriel is seeing everything, Richard. He described my clothes, the color of my eyes, the flowers in the park. Things he never could have known." Richard disconnected the video conference unceremoniously and rushed to the elevator, leaving a room full of Asian investors staring at an empty screen. During the 20 minutes of traffic to Central Park, his mind worked frantically trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe Gabriel had always had some residual vision. Maybe the doctors had been wrong. Anything was more plausible than a miracle. When he arrived at the park and saw Gabriel running towards him, dodging trees and obstacles with the naturalness of someone who had always seen, Richard felt his legs weaken. Dad, look." Gabriel stopped in front of him. His eyes, which had always seemed glazed and unfocused, now shone with life and direction. "I can see you. I can see what you look like." Richard knelt slowly, holding his son's face in his trembling hands. Gabriel's eyes perfectly followed the movement of his hands, focusing on his face with impossible precision. How did this happen?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Gabriel told the whole story, how he got lost, how he found the boy who helped him, how he placed his hands over his eyes and prayed. Richard listened in silence, his scientific mind rejecting every word, but his eyes seeing the undeniable proof before him. "Where is this boy now?" he asked. "He disappeared, Dad. After Carla arrived, he just vanished." Richard spent the rest of the afternoon at Mount Sinai Hospital, where a team of ophthalmologists examined Gabriel under his direct supervision. Dr. Henry Morales, one of the country's most respected specialists in congenital blindness, repeated the exams 3 times before giving his verdict. "Mr. Morrison, it's impossible," the doctor said, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. "Gabriel's exams show perfect eyes, impeccable corneas, functional retinas, healthy optic nerves. It's as if he never had any visual problems. But he was born blind. We have 8 years of medical documentation proving it." "I know. I myself followed the case from birth. I have the CT scans, the neurological exams, everything. What I see now completely contradicts our previous documentation." Dr. Morales pulled out Gabriel's old exams and compared them with the new ones. "Look here," he said, pointing to the images. "In the exams from 2 months ago, we clearly have irreversible damage to the visual cortex. Today, that same region appears completely normal, as if it had never been affected." Richard left the hospital with more questions than answers. In the following days, he took Gabriel to 5 more different specialists, including a renowned international neurologist who came especially from Boston to examine the case. All reached the same impossible conclusion. Gabriel had perfect eyes and should never have been blind. Meanwhile, the news began to leak. First among hospital staff, then among doctors, and finally it reached the press. "Miracle in New York City. Billionaire's son recovers sight instantly," emblazoned the front page of all the city's newspapers. Richard tried to control the situation, but it was like trying to hold water with his hands. Journalists camped in front of his house, his company was bombarded with calls, and his every move became news. It was during this chaos that his search began for the boy who had changed Gabriel's life. He hired private investigators, offered rewards, even made a public appeal on television. But John remained invisible, as if he had been swallowed by the city. "Why do you want to find him so badly, Dad?" Gabriel asked one night, as they dined on the penthouse balcony. It was the first time the boy could see the city lights spreading infinitely before his eyes. Richard hesitated before answering. How to explain to an 8-year-old child that he needed to find answers for something that defied everything he had always believed in? How to admit that, for the first time in 8 years, he felt something other than emptiness in his chest, because he did something extraordinary for you? I need to thank him properly. He won't want money, Dad. When I offered him my bracelet as a gift, he said that God healed me, not him. Richard swallowed hard. The word God sounded strange in his house, a concept he had abandoned long ago. Helen used to be religious, went to Mass every Sunday, believed in miracles and divine interventions. Richard always respected her faith but never shared it. And after she passed away, leaving him alone with a blind son, any remnant of spirituality had died with her. Gabriel, he said carefully, do you really believe it was God who healed your eyes? The boy looked at him with those eyes that now shone with life. I felt it, Dad. When John put his hands on my face, it was like a warm light passed through me. And he talked to God like he was his real friend. Like God was right there, listening. That night, Richard stayed awake until dawn, looking at the city lights. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to question his certainties. Everything he believed in, science, logic, control, had been challenged by a 7-year-old boy who talked to God. 3 weeks after Gabriel's cure, the answer came from where he least expected it. Mrs. Benedict, a 70-year-old woman who distributed soup to homeless people in downtown, recognized John in one of the television reports. I know that boy, she told a social worker who accompanied her work. That's John, a little angel who shows up here once in a while. The information reached Richard through a complex network of contacts he had established during his search. Mrs. Benedict agreed to mediate the meeting, but only under her conditions. This boy has suffered a lot in life, she said when Richard approached her personally. He doesn't need any more exploitation or exposure. If you want to meet him, it's going to be my way. Richard, accustomed to commanding all situations, swallowed his pride and accepted. That Saturday morning, he dressed in simple clothes and followed Mrs. Benedict to a square in downtown, where she distributed food to the homeless population. It was there that he saw John for the first time. A boy small for his 7 years, too thin, with clothes that were clearly donations, but with eyes that shone with a special light. He was helping Mrs. Benedict serve soup, talking cheerfully with each person who approached, treating everyone with the same affection and respect. When Mrs. Benedict pointed towards Richard and whispered something in his ear, John looked at him and smiled. A smile that carried so much purity and kindness that Richard felt something stir in his chest for the first time in 8 years. You're Gabriel's dad, John said, approaching fearlessly. How is he? He's fine. Very well, thanks to you. Richard knelt to be at the boy's height. John, what you did for my son. I have no words to thank you. It wasn't me who did it, sir. It was God. Even so, I want to repay you somehow. Anything you need, anything you want. John thought for a moment, looking around at the people waiting in the soup line. Can you help me help them? The simple question hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. Here was a 7-year-old boy who had nothing but the clothes on his back, concerned about others who had even less. What do you mean, John? There are a lot of people freezing here downtown, and there are kids who can't even read. If I had a big place, I could help more people. At that moment, looking at that extraordinary boy, Richard Morrison made a decision that would change his life forever. But he still didn't know that John held a secret that would make everything even more complex. Richard looked around the square, observing the people who depended on Mrs. Benedict's generosity for a decent meal. Dirty children played among tired adults. Elderly people tried to warm themselves with cardboard and torn blankets. For the first time in his life, he truly saw the poverty that had always existed just a few miles from his luxurious penthouse. John, he said, still kneeling before the boy, what if I offered you not just a place to help these people, but a home for you too? The boy tilted his head, confused. A home? I want you to come live with me and Gabriel. I want you to be brothers. Mrs. Benedict approached, placing a protective hand on John's shoulder. Sir, are you sure about what you're offering? This boy isn't a trophy to show off. I know, Richard replied, and for the first time in years there was total sincerity in his voice. It's not about showing off. It's about family. Gabriel talks about John every day since he regained his sight. And I feel I need to do this. John looked at Mrs. Benedict, then at Richard, his bright, intelligent eyes processing the offer. Can I keep coming here to help you all? Whenever you want, Richard promised. And can I take food for the people on the street? Of course. John smiled, that smile that had already changed Gabriel's life forever. Then I accept, Mr. Richard. The journey from the square to the mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a journey between worlds. John pressed his face against the car window, watching the city gradually change. Buildings becoming more spaced out, streets wider, vegetation more abundant. When they arrived at the gated community, his eyes widened at the automatic gates and the houses that looked like palaces. Dad! Gabriel ran to greet John even before the car fully stopped. The friendship between the two boys had blossomed during the visits Richard had allowed in recent weeks. You're going to live here with me now. Richard's mansion was a monument to success. Over 50,000 square feet of built area, with an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a tennis court, a private cinema, and a garden that looked straight out of a magazine. For John, accustomed to sleeping under awnings, this was literally another planet. Celia, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for 15 years, observed the boys' arrival with poorly disguised skepticism. William, the gardener, and Lucy, the cook, exchanged significant glances when Richard announced that John would be a permanent part of the family. Mr. Richard, Celia said after the boys went upstairs to see John's new room, with all due respect, are you sure about this decision? This boy comes from the streets. We know nothing about him. Richard looked at her firmly. I know enough, Celia. He saved my son. Now he's my son too. In the first few days, John faced difficulties no one had anticipated. He slept on the floor beside the bed because the soft mattress made him feel like he was sinking. He was afraid of automatic showers and doors that opened by themselves. He ate only what was necessary, secretly saving part of his food in his room to distribute later. Why don't you eat everything, John? Gabriel asked during dinner on his second night in the mansion. There's a lot of food here, John replied without malice. Out there, people are hungry. Richard felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he was being confronted with his own abundance through the eyes of a child who knew real scarcity. But little by little, John began to win everyone in the house over. He helped William in the garden, learning the name of each plant and caring for them with special affection. He chatted with Lucy in the kitchen, making her laugh with his innocent questions about the exotic ingredients she used. And when Celia mentioned that her granddaughter was hospitalized with pneumonia, John held her hands and offered a simple and sincere prayer. Heavenly Father, Mrs. Celia's granddaughter is sick. Please make her get well soon so she can play again. 3 days later, the girl was discharged from the hospital with a recovery that doctors called surprisingly fast. Celia never again questioned John's presence in the house. It was during his third week in the mansion that John's past decided to collect its due. Richard was in his office when Sandra informed him that a woman named Marcia Smith was at the reception, claiming to be John's biological aunt. Marcia appeared to be in her 40s, with bleached blonde hair, clothes that tried to look expensive but couldn't hide their questionable origin. Beside her was a tall, thin man who introduced himself as Serge Mason, a lawyer. Mr. Morrison, Marcia said in a syrupy voice, I've come to pick up my nephew. I heard you took him off the streets and I thank you for that, but now I can take care of him. Richard received them in the living room, keeping John and Gabriel upstairs. Something about Marcia deeply bothered him. Perhaps it was the way her calculating eyes assessed every expensive object in the room. Mrs. Smith, John never mentioned having an aunt. Where were you when he needed you? I was going through difficulties. But now I'm in a position to raise him properly. Serge intervened, placing a folder on the table. Mr. Morrison, my client has legal rights over the minor. She is a blood relative and can prove it. And how much do you want? Richard asked directly. Marcia feigned indignation. How dare you suggest I'm here for money? John is my blood. $100,000, Richard said coldly. 200. 500. What's the price to leave John alone? It's not about money, Serge insisted. It's about family. But Richard knew the body language of greed very well. He had spent years negotiating with all sorts of people. and Marcia and Serge were clearly interested in something much bigger than quick cash. After they left, promising to return with legal documents, Richard hired a team of private investigators to uncover everything about Marcia Smith's and Serge Mason's past. What he discovered infuriated him. Marcia was indeed John's distant aunt, the sister of his mother who had passed away years earlier. But she also had a history of child neglect, with her own children having been removed from her custody by Child Protective Services. Serge, in turn, was not even a licensed lawyer, but a con artist with a police record for fraud. Their plan was simple and cruel: obtain legal guardianship of John, exploit him as the miracle boy, charging people desperate for healing to have him bless them. They even had a website already created and pamphlets printed. When they returned the following week with forged documents and legal threats, Richard was prepared. He received them again in the living room, but this time he had his own lawyer present and an envelope full of evidence. "Mr. Mason," Richard said calmly, "I believe there's a misunderstanding here. You are not a lawyer, you are a con artist. And Mrs. Smith," he turned to Marcia, "has an interesting history with Child Protective Services." He opened the envelope and spread the evidence on the table: photographs, documents, recordings of legally intercepted conversations where they discussed how to monetize John's powers. "You have two options," Richard continued. "You leave my house now and never approach John again, or I hand all of this over to the federal police. Child exploitation is a federal crime, ladies and gentlemen." Marcia tried to argue, but Serge pulled her arm. They knew they had been discovered, and that Richard had the resources to make their lives hell. "This won't be the end of it," Marcia threatened before leaving. "Yes, it will," Richard replied. "And if you bother my family again, you'll find out just how far a father's protection can go." That night, Richard spoke seriously with John about what had happened. The boy listened in silence, then asked, "Mr. Richard, will I have to leave?" "Never," Richard promised, kneeling before him. "You are my son now, John, and I will protect you from anyone who wants to hurt you." John smiled and hugged Richard tightly. "Thank you, Dad." It was the first time John had called him Dad, and Richard felt tears stream down his cheeks. In that moment, he understood that the true miracle had not just been the healing of Gabriel's blindness, but the healing of his own cold heart. The next day, Richard officially began the adoption process for John. He knew it would be a long and complex path, especially as a single man with high public visibility. But he also knew he had found something he thought he had lost forever: a complete family and the purpose of being a real father. 6 months after John arrived at the mansion, Richard Morrison was unrecognizable. The businessman who used to work 15 hours a day now left the office at 5 in the afternoon to have dinner with his sons. Saturday meetings were permanently cancelled, and Sundays became sacred, days dedicated entirely to family. "Sandra, cancel my Thursday agenda," he told his secretary one Tuesday morning. "Gabriel has a school presentation, and John has an appointment with the social worker." Sandra almost choked on her coffee. In the 15 years she had worked for Richard, she had never seen him cancel meetings for personal reasons. "But sir, the meeting with the Koreans was scheduled 2 months ago. Reschedule it. There are more important things than closing deals." The transformation did not go unnoticed by the company's employees. Mark, his oldest partner, commented during a board meeting, "Richard, I don't know what medicine you're taking, but I want the prescription. I've never seen you so human." The adoption process was proving more complex than Richard had imagined. As a single millionaire man with high media exposure, every step was meticulously scrutinized. Dr. Patricia Miller, the social worker responsible for the case, visited the house regularly, observing the family dynamics and interviewing everyone involved. "John," she asked during one of her visits, "do you feel safe here? You can tell me if anything bothers you." John, who was coloring a drawing at the kitchen table with Gabriel, looked up with bright eyes. "Dr. Miller, I've never been so happy in my life. Dad, Richard, and Gabriel are my real family now." "And at school? How are you adapting?" John had been enrolled in the same private school as Gabriel, a decision that generated some comments among other parents. Initially, there was resistance and thinly veiled prejudice. Some mothers whispered about the street boy, who now studied with their children. But John, with his natural kindness and sharp intelligence, soon won over teachers and classmates. "He's extraordinary," commented Miss Anna Paulson, the teacher, to Richard during a school meeting. John absorbs knowledge like a sponge, and the most impressive thing is how he helps classmates who are struggling. I've never seen such an empathetic child. Meanwhile, Richard fulfilled his promise to help John help others. He created the John Gabriel Foundation, a name combining both sons, with an initial budget of $50 million. Mrs. Benedict was hired as community director, with a salary that allowed her to stop worrying about money for the rest of her life. "Mr. Richard," she said on her first day of work, "I never thought I'd see a rich company truly wanting to help the poor, not just appear on television." The foundation began constructing 3 shelters in the city, designed specifically to serve homeless children. John actively participated in the planning, suggesting details that only someone who had lived on the streets could know. "Dad, there has to be a warm place to sleep," he would say, looking at the architect's blueprints. "And there has to be a shower with hot water, but not too strong because it scares those who've never had a hot bath. And the kitchen has to be always open, because street kids get hungry at any time." The architects noted every suggestion with reverence. They had never worked with such a young and experienced consultant at the same time. At home, the transformation continued. Richard hired a private guitar teacher for John, who had shown musical talent playing on cans in the street. Gabriel, inspired by his brother, asked to learn piano. The nights in the mansion, once silent and cold, now filled with music and laughter. Celia, the housekeeper who had initially resisted John's presence, now treated him like a grandson. "That boy has a heart of gold," she confided to Lucy one afternoon. "Yesterday he helped me tidy his room and then asked if I wasn't tired, if I wanted him to make me some tea." William, the gardener, created a special corner in the garden which he called John's Garden Plot. There, the boy planted herbs and vegetables that were later donated to Mrs. Benedict's community kitchen. During one of Dr. Miller's visits, she observed a scene that deeply affected her. Gabriel had fallen off his bicycle and scraped his knee. John immediately stopped what he was doing, carefully cleaned his brother's wound, and then sat beside him on the sofa, telling funny stories to distract him from the pain. "Mr. Morrison," she said privately, "I rarely see such genuine family bonds, even in biological families. These boys truly love each other as brothers." Richard smiled, watching his 2 sons through the living room window. "Dr. Miller, can I make a confession? I thought I was saving John from the streets, but in reality he saved me and Gabriel. Before he arrived, this house was just a place to sleep. Now it's a home." The relationship between father and sons deepened every day. Richard began attending church on Sundays, not because he had suddenly become religious, but because he wanted to understand the faith that moved John. Sitting in the pew of the small neighborhood chapel, he observed how John prayed with the naturalness of someone talking to an intimate friend. "Heavenly Father," John whispered with his eyes closed, "thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for taking care of Gabriel and Dad Richard. And please, take care of the children who are still on the streets. They need love too." These moments touched Richard in a way he couldn't explain. Slowly, very slowly, something in his heart began to awaken. Not exactly faith, but an openness to possibilities that his scientific mind had always rejected. It was during the construction of the Foundation's 2nd shelter that something unexpected happened. John was visiting the construction site when he saw an elderly man collecting cardboard on a nearby street. The boy stopped abruptly, his eyes filling with tears of joy. "Mr. Anthony," he shouted, running towards the man. The elderly man looked at him without immediately recognizing him. John had changed a lot: clean clothes, cut hair, a healthy appearance. But when the boy smiled, Mr. Anthony recognized him instantly. "John, my boy, where have you been? I looked for you on the streets." "Mr. Anthony, you taught me to read. Remember, under the University Heights Bridge." The reunion was emotional. Mr. Anthony had been a primary school teacher before losing everything in a series of personal tragedies. On the streets, he had become a kind of informal educator, teaching abandoned children to read using newspaper scraps and charcoal. Richard watched the scene, moved. When John told the whole story of the man who had given him the gift of literacy, he made an immediate decision. "Mr. Anthony," Richard said, approaching, "would you like to work for our foundation? We need someone experienced to coordinate the education of the children in the shelters." The elderly man looked suspicious. "Sir, I no longer have documents. I have nothing. I'm just a homeless man." "You have something much more valuable," Richard replied. "You have the experience of someone who truly knows these children, and you have the gift of teaching, which John never forgot." 3 months later, Mr. Anthony was living in the first completed shelter, coordinating a literacy program that would become a model for the entire network. John visited him every week, and the two had long conversations about books and learning. The final hearing for the adoption was scheduled for a Thursday in December. The day before, Richard was more nervous than he had ever been in his business life. All evaluations had been positive, but he knew the final decision depended on the judge. "Dad," John said that night, finding Richard in the office looking at the documents for the 100th time, "are you worried?" "A little, son. Tomorrow the judge will decide if you can stay with us forever." John approached and held Richard's hand. "Dad, no matter what the judge says, in my head and in my heart, you're already my real dad, and Gabriel is already my real brother. No one can take that away." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. He knelt and hugged John tightly. "You changed our lives, John. You changed everything." "It wasn't me, Dad, it was God who brought our family together." That night, for the first time in 8 years, Richard Morrison prayed. Not an eloquent or theologically correct prayer, but a simple and honest conversation with something greater than himself, asking to keep his family united. The morning of the final hearing dawned sunny in New York City, as if the heavens themselves wished to bless that special day. Richard woke up early, but found John already up in the kitchen, helping Lucy prepare breakfast for the whole family. "Good morning, Dad," John said with his radiant smile. "I made you a special coffee today." Richard tasted the coffee and feigned surprise. "It's delicious." "What's the secret?" "I put a lot of love in it," John replied seriously. "Mrs. Lucy said love is the most important ingredient in any recipe." Lucy smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "This boy already knows more about cooking than many adults out there." Gabriel ran down the stairs, wearing his best school uniform. "Today's the day, right, Dad?" "Today John officially becomes my brother." "I hope so, son," Richard replied, trying to contain his anxiety. Celia appeared in the kitchen carrying a bouquet of flowers from the garden. "For good luck," she said, handing the flowers to John. "William picked the most beautiful ones this morning." The journey to the Manhattan courthouse was silent. Richard drove with concentration. John looked out the window, observing the city that had once been just a hostile place to survive, and Gabriel held his brother's hand, offering all the support he could. At the entrance of the courthouse, they met Dr. Patricia Miller, who would accompany them during the hearing. She observed the family for a moment and smiled with professional satisfaction. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Ready," Richard replied, placing his hands on the shoulders of both boys. The courtroom was imposing, with dark wood and a solemn atmosphere that would intimidate any child. But John entered hand in hand with Richard and Gabriel, radiating the serene confidence of someone who knows they are in the right place. Judge Ferdinand Carter, of the family court, was known for his rigor and extreme care with adoption cases. He had meticulously studied Richard's process, including detailed investigations into his financial capacity, emotional stability, and genuineness of motivations. "Mr. Richard Morrison," the judge began after everyone was seated, "this is a rather unusual case. A single businessman who wishes to adopt a child he met under extraordinary circumstances. Explain to me, in your own words, why you desire this adoption." Richard stood up respectfully. "Your Honor, when I met John, I was a man who had lost the ability to truly love. I lived only to work, accumulating wealth but remaining emotionally empty. John not only restored my son Gabriel's sight, he restored the capacity to feel for our entire family. And you, John," the judge addressed the boy directly, "do you understand what it means to be adopted?" John stood up, small but firm before the highest authority in the room. "Yes, Your Honor. It means that Dad Richard will be my real father on paper too, not just in my heart. And it means that Gabriel will be my brother forever. Do you wish this?" "Very much, sir. I never had a real family. Now I do, and I want it to be forever." The judge called Gabriel to testify as well. The boy, now 9 years old and with full vision, spoke emotionally about how John had changed his life, not only by curing his blindness, but by teaching him about kindness, generosity, And faith. Your Honor, Gabriel said, John is the best brother I could have. He teaches me things every day. He taught me that helping others is the most important thing in the world. Dr. Miller presented her final report, highlighting the extraordinary transformation she had observed in the entire family. Your Honor, in 20 years of work I have rarely seen such a natural and beneficial family integration for all involved. The judge called for a recess to evaluate all the documents and testimonies. During the 15 minutes of waiting, John remained calm, but Richard felt his heart racing. Gabriel held both their hands, forming a small chain of mutual support. When they returned to the room, Judge Carter had a serious expression that did not reveal his decision. Mr. Richard Morrison, he said solemnly, adoption is an act of supreme responsibility. It means legally assuming the parenthood of a child, with all the rights and duties that implies. Richard nodded, his throat dry with anxiety. After careful analysis of all the evidence, testimonies, and reports, I consider that this adoption fully meets the principle of the child's best interest. Therefore, I grant the adoption request. John Smith is now legally and officially John Morrison, son of Richard Morrison. The room exploded in silent emotion. Gabriel shouted with joy. Dr. Miller smiled with tears in her eyes. And Richard felt as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from his shoulders. John looked at Richard with those bright eyes that had changed everything. Now I can call you Dad for real? For you always could, my son. But now it's official. John ran into Richard's arms, and for the first time since Helen had passed away, the businessman cried tears of pure joy. 6 months later, the John Gabriel Foundation had become a national reference in caring for vulnerable children. 3 shelters were operating at full capacity, a 4th was under construction, and there were plans to expand to other cities. John, now officially John Morrison, had excelled in school as one of the best students in his class. More important than his excellent grades was his natural leadership, always helping classmates with difficulties and organizing fundraising campaigns to help other needy children. Gabriel, inspired by his brother, had become John's best friend and biggest advocate. The two were inseparable, complementing each other perfectly. Gabriel with his analytical intelligence inherited from his father, John with his emotional and spiritual wisdom. Richard had found a balance between work and family that he never imagined possible. The company continued to prosper, but now it had a greater purpose, to generate resources to help other families form and strengthen. One Sunday in September, the family gathered in the mansion's garden for a special lunch. Mrs. Benedict, Mr. Anthony, Celia, William, and Lucy had been invited to celebrate the first official anniversary of the adoption. "Dad," John said as everyone toasted with grape juice, "can I make a speech?" Richard smiled. "Of course, son." John stood up, picked up his small cup, and looked at everyone present. "I want to thank God for bringing our family together. When I was little and lived on the street, I always asked God to give me a family, but I thought family was just a dad, mom, and brother. Now I know that family is much bigger." He pointed to each person present. "Mrs. Benedict is like my grandma. Mr. Anthony is like my teacher and my grandpa. Celia, Lucy, and William are like my dear aunts and uncles. Gabriel is my brother in my heart and on paper. And Dad Richard." John paused, emotional. "Dad Richard taught me that a father's love doesn't have to come from blood. It comes from the heart." There wasn't a dry eye at the table. Richard stood up and hugged John, then extended his arm to include Gabriel in the embrace. "Son," Richard said, "you're right about family being bigger than we imagine. But you also taught me something important, that the greatest miracles are not those that defy science, they are those that transform hearts." "What do you mean, Dad?" "The miracle of you restoring Gabriel's sight was extraordinary, but the true miracle was you teaching us to see what truly matters. Love, family, purpose. You healed more than your brother's eyes. You healed our capacity to love." John smiled, that smile that had started the whole transformation. "So that means we all did miracles for each other?" "Exactly," Richard replied. "And the most beautiful thing is that these miracles continue to happen every day." As the sun set over New York City, the Morrison family remained gathered in the garden, talking, laughing, and planning the future. Beside them, Buddy, the stray dog they had adopted a few months earlier, because John insisted that every family needed a dog, ran joyfully among the children. That night, like every other, John said his prayer of gratitude before sleeping. But this time Richard accompanied him, discovering that talking to God could be as simple and natural as a conversation between father and son. "Heavenly Father," John whispered, "thank you for our family. Thank you for healing Gabriel, for giving me a father, for bringing us all together. And thank you for teaching me that love is the greatest miracle of all." Richard, kneeling beside his son's bed, added his own silent prayer. "Thank you for sending me this extraordinary boy. Thank you for teaching me to be a real father. And thank you for showing me that faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting in love." When John fell asleep, Richard remained there for a few minutes, observing the serene face of the boy who had transformed his life. Outside, New York City continued its frantic nightlife, but inside that house there was peace, love, and the certainty that life's greatest treasures cannot be bought, only received with gratitude and shared with generosity. The story of Richard, Gabriel, and John would become a legend in New York City, inspiring other families to open their hearts to adoption and to solidarity. The John Gabriel Foundation would continue to grow, transforming the lives of thousands of children in the years to come. But for the Morrison family, true success was there, in those simple moments of daily life, where love manifested itself not in grand gestures, but in sincere hugs, honest conversations, and the certainty that they belonged to each other. And so, the boy who once slept under awnings taught a billionaire businessman that the greatest empire anyone can build is not made of buildings and money, but of true relationships and unconditional love.